Good morning, everybody. I'm going to be really transparent here. I got kicked out of the webinar for about 2 minutes. We have enough co-hosts on here that should not stop our presentation today, but I apologize if there are any glitches in you being able to see the PowerPoint or if the music stopped for you guys. Before we get started, can somebody put in the chat if you can hear? Okay, good. Thank you so much. Okay, so my name is Lee Taylor, and on behalf of our co-conveners, Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities, and Mental Health America of Kentucky, I just want to welcome everyone to the System of Care Academy. This is our 10th anniversary, and we are super excited to be here today. Our session today is in Zoom webinar. That means that all attendees are muted and your videos are off. We are recording the session and we will have it available soon, so watch the SOC Academy website. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for any presenter questions. We do plan on having time for questions and answers. If you have any tech issues or you can't see the interpreter at any point today, please put that in the chat box so that we can fix that. Our American Sign Language interpreters will be on screen throughout the session today. We're also using auto captioning. If you do not see the captions, please click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If you do not see the interpreters, please check your view at the top, and you should be able to set that to either gallery view or speaker and still be able to see our interpreters. If you've been multitasking or not paying attention, here's where you want to start paying attention. We're going to talk about certificates of attendance and continuing education. You must be in the content portion of today's webinar for at least 90% of the session to be eligible for a certificate. This is a mandate by the boards, and we cannot give partial credit. You are not required to sign in by chat. Zoom captured your sign-in when you entered the room. Be sure that you're always entering the same email address to register for each session and to enter each Zoom room. That's really important because your email address is the unique identifier that we use to track attendance. Within 2 weeks of the session, you'll receive an email from me if you were present for at least 90% of the session that has the session evaluation link. You'll go to the website, you'll complete your session evaluation, and then the next screen will be your certificate. From that page, you can either save it or print it. Academy staff do not print, mail, or email those certificates. That website stays live, so you can always go back and print that at any point. So you may want to book that website also when we send it out. And now I would like to introduce our presenter. It is my pleasure to present James Campbell. James is the Training and Technical Assistance Manager at the Southeast Addiction Technology Transfer Center, which we call the AADC. He has been working professionally in the human services field for over 25 years. During that time, he has demonstrated leadership in numerous capacities and across diverse programs. He holds master's degrees in both leadership and management and in community counseling from Webster University. His background includes advanced work in areas such as adolescent treatment, positive recovery, mindful practice, spirituality and recovery, the wounded healer, de-escalation, adverse childhood experiences and trauma, group process, and experiential treatment modalities. James has been with us for several systemic care academies, as well as the Kentucky School for Alcohol and Other Drug Studies, and we're excited to have him back with us today. So thank you, James.
Thank you so much. It's always a privilege to be here, and I am really excited about being a part of this year Kentucky Systems of Care Academy. Hopefully you've been taking advantage of some of the great training that's already happened and some of those still yet to come. I hope that you'll tune in and attend to those as well. It's a great opportunity to learn from some great folks. I'll go ahead and share my screen to get that pulled up. And get us underway with talking about today's subject, which is families. Families impacted by substance use in particular, under the heading, Rocking the Roles. I always like to sort of start with who I am and why I'm here, not because I am the most important person in this training. In fact, every group I've ever run, every training I've ever been a part of, I've always typically learned as much as I've taught. And so certainly I'm glad to be able to be a part of such a great group and such a diverse group here today. As far as who I am and why I'm here, as was mentioned, I serve as the Associate Director of SATTC. I also have a private business as well and teach at various universities. But probably the highest credential that I can give you for today's training is that I'm a family member, that I came from a family, that I continue to be a part of one, and that colors the work that I do all the time. So as we go through today, I think that you'll see why I put that on the list of credentials that we have. Oftentimes we talk about clinical services and treatment, and we talk about clients this and therapists that. But my approach to that is a little bit different. I actually think that there's probably very little that I ever talk about or ever train on or teach on that only applies to clients. Because back before we had all that alphabet soup after our names, all those credentials and licenses and certifications, our first credential was that we were human. And at the end, it's usually always one human being helping another human being that makes the difference. We certainly develop techniques. We try to hone those skills. But the reality is, at heart, it's always one human being coming alongside another on their path. Our objectives for today are pretty straightforward. I think that we won't have any trouble getting to those in the time allotted. Just by way of planning ahead, We will have a short break just past halfway, probably about 10:45 this morning. I just want to give you that heads up. So if you're planning your morning and you're planning your breaks, you'll kind of know that that's on the horizon. But during our time together, these are the things that I hope that we're able to do. We'll define historic views of family roles and how those have impacted family engagement, develop an understanding of the impact of family systems on substance use disorders, distinguish between families of origin and families of support, and then explore how to engage and leverage families in fostering recovery through some practical, effective steps and suggestions for engaging families in treatment. We'll also talk a little bit about when you should and should not engage families as well. It's not always a given. I think that's my default position, is to engage families, but there are times when that really is not advised, and we'll talk about that as we move forward. So let's begin by looking at a definition of the family. And this definition, at least in my timeline, is not too ancient. It comes from Webster's. Many of you know that old things, those big thick dictionaries from back in the day. This particular definition comes from them in 1996, and it says a group of individuals usually living under one roof with one head, a group of persons of common ancestry, a group of people united by common characteristics. Um, I don't know about you, but as I read that definition, I can't help but feel like it's kind of missing the mark on almost every turn. Uh, when I think about a group of individuals living under one roof, well, at this point in my life, my family of origin does not live in the same house as I do. I have my own family now. And so we don't all live under the same roof, but that doesn't mean that my mother quit being my mother or my father quit being my father, but we don't reside under one roof anymore. With one head. Now, it may be that in a patriarchal family, there was like one person who was clearly the head of the family, or in a matriarchal or mother led family, there was one identified head. But I've been around long enough to know that sometimes there's no head of the family. Sometimes the head is one of the children. Sometimes it's like a hydra where everybody's trying to be in charge and they're fighting amongst themselves. So to say that there's one head is really probably not a fair assessment either. A group of persons of common ancestry, in other words, shared blood lineage. Although I certainly think that that is a piece of that puzzle, we live in the Southeast, which means that probably most of us have somebody in our lives that we called aunt or uncle who was no blood relation whatsoever. Or what if you adopt a child? Or what if it is a half brother or sister? Sometimes there is a blood relationship, kinship in that way, but sometimes that is not the case as well. There isn't always that common ancestry. And a group of people united by common characteristics. Oftentimes we do share a lot in common with our family, but the reality is we don't share everything in common with our family. There's some traits that are family traits of mine that I've worked very hard to recover from. The reality is that we don't necessarily all share the same traits, nor would we want to. But we probably do have some things that are sort of common threads as we move through. So as we look at that definition of family, I would encourage you to think for just a moment about your own family. Think about, first of all, when I say think about your family, who comes to mind? Do you think more about the family that you came from, your family of origin? If you have your own family today, do you think more in terms of that family? If you have a spouse, if you have children, if you have those kinds of things, are those more people that you think of or consider as family? Do you have people who are a part of your family who, again, may not be any blood relation, but you've adopted them over the years, so to speak? And I don't mean that formal adoption, but they're your real family. They're who you reach out to most in a time of need. That may be a part of that equation as well. So as we think about our own families, and certainly as we work through today, I hope you will consider your own family in the context of a lot of this information as well. We see that this definition doesn't always exactly line up. It really isn't always a good assessment. It's important for us as providers to remember that when we're doing assessment too. If you're do a lot of assessment or intake at your programs or services, Keep in mind that family might include a whole lot of different people. It could include grandparents who may or may not be the caregivers, older siblings, foster parents. Sometimes there are multiple caretakers that have been in and out of the family over the course of time. So that really can look very different from family to family and from person to person. We have to keep that in mind, because if we don't, we'll make a lot of assumptions about family, and we may miss some really important information that could really benefit the person that we're there to serve in terms of their recovery, in terms of their support system as well. So when you think about how do you help identify your client support systems, a lot of times it comes down to the questions that we ask. I always say that, you get very different answers. If I ask somebody, did you ever develop tolerance for alcohol? Most of the time they will say no, versus that if I ask, did you ever get where you could handle your liquor? Oh yeah. I mean, I was a lightweight when I started out, but now it's really a different way of asking the same question. So we do need to be culturally aware in terms of who we're talking to, and use language that's going to actually solicit more of a response. Likewise, when we talk about family and support systems, asking when I ask you about your family, who comes to mind? That's a way of getting toward that information and beginning to solicit that a bit as well. Or one that I will often ask is really practical is, if you're driving at 2 o'clock in the morning and have a flat tire, you don't have AAA, who are you going to call? That's another way of kind of getting to that. Who is really there as a support? Who could you really reach out to as well? In a very real sense, family is the principal institution for the socialization of children. Now, that's sort of a cold definition. It's not exactly warm and fuzzy feeling, but family is that principal institution that helps us learn our social skills, how to navigate the world that we are a part of. Conflict resolution, usually the first place we learn that is within the context of the family. Communication, usually the first place we learn that is within the context of family. What roles we fall into, oftentimes we first encounter that in that family context as well. So it's how we socialize, and that can either be a tremendous, wonderful benefit, because sometimes we learn great communication skills. One thing I often say when I'm doing family trainings is my goal is not to cause any trauma. If you had a wonderful upbringing, a supportive upbringing where you learned how to solve problems well, you were communicating effectively within the household, people respected one another. My goal isn't to disrupt that. I'm not trying to create family problems or problems in the family system. It's just to take an honest look at those. So if you had that kind of support, that's wonderful. We just can't assume that everyone that we serve had that kind of support, though some do, but not all do, certainly. On the other end of that spectrum, we also have some families that are some individuals who spend a lifetime recovering from things they learned in their family of origin. Sometimes we learn lessons that were very unhelpful. Sometimes you learned, if you're struggling and you're having a hard time, reach out for support. Some of us also learned that family business is family business, and you don't take that outside of the family for any reason. Those are two different messages that different families might present. And we internalize that, we sort of metabolize that, and it becomes a part of who we are until we learn to challenge it. Carl Jung, one of my favorite quotes by him, is said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate our lives, and we will call it fate. So becoming aware of our patterns of communication, becoming aware of the ways that we do things and why, doesn't automatically fix things. It doesn't automatically set everything right, but it gives us the opportunity to change and to grow healthier over time. So why do we even talk about families? Most of us, it's not like you can always just easily go back and change family. Some of us, if you looked at who made up your family, if we're really honest, there may be some folks you would have liked to have voted off the island. But we can't always do it that easily and that readily. Why do we talk about families at all? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. Number one is that our families really are powerful. They have tremendous impact in our lives. And our families are also important, meaning we attach great value to family connections, and our society does as well. That our families are progressive. Now, what I mean by that is that they're not stagnant, they're dynamic, they change over time. At this point in life, I have lived long enough to have been a part of my family of origin, to step out and to begin creating my own family, and to now have children who are away at college. That's a lot of different transitions. I'm not a grandparent yet, and I'm not in a hurry for that. But I know that that day is likely to come. There's an ebb and a flow. Families change, they progress over time, they don't stay the same. That what families say is important. We can probably all think of things that we heard in our family over and over again growing up. There were things that were just said repeatedly. Um, Now, this may or may not have been in your family, but some of those might include things like children are to be seen and not heard. Um, we hear those kinds of things. Oftentimes, they're messages that are repeated verbally over and over. Then, what families do in the home is more important than what they say. I sort of have this image of someone with, like, a, a Marlboro 100 or a Newport 100 in their fingers, going, "Now, don't you smoke, children." And more often than not, what gets done or what gets adhered to is what is modeled, not what is said. And it says to what families do in their home, even when their children are not there. Sometimes, if you're working with adults, they'll say, "Oh, the children have no idea that I'm using or that I'm drinking or that I'm doing this or that." You would be amazed what children know. They often know much more than we give them credit for. But more important than what families say and what they do is who they are. We'll come back around to this a little bit later on, but one of the foundational bottom line understandings of all biology is you can only reproduce what you are. Two horses do not mate and make a cow, and two cows do not mate and make a dog, and two dogs don't mate and create a cat. You can only reproduce what you are. And so, in a family, one of the most important things to understand is if you have a dysfunctional, unhealthy family system, you are not going to produce healthy offspring. It doesn't mean that the children can't get healthier. It just means that they're going to be overcoming what they grew up in order to be so. And so oftentimes I think we have that idea that somehow we're going to do things in a certain way or say certain things in our families, maybe to our children or to young people in our families, and that's somehow going to change the course. Well, they're more likely to adapt to what we do than what we say, and they're more likely to model who we are than even what we do. Oftentimes, too, we treat chronic conditions in acute settings. If I had to really boil down, probably the biggest challenge to treatment in the United States and the way it's done in the United States, I think that's it. We're treating a chronic disease of addiction in an acute setting. Like, in other words, we're treating it like it's a broken arm or like it's a sinus infection. Come in for your 6 sessions and you'll be all better. And that's all we can get the prior authorization for sometimes, right? Uh, that can be a real challenge when they may have spent 25 years developing this chronic condition. Then we're going to try to treat it as though it's something that can be cured in 6 sessions. And that just is not the reality. So one of the important things about impacting family or trying to engage families is they are going to be around a lot longer than the treatment provider is, even for, if the family is not particularly healthy or if they're incredibly healthy, they're still more likely to be around a lot longer than you are. So if you can impact the family system, it really has the opportunity to support gains that are made in treatment, to really make that change last, if you will. To me, that's a really compelling reason to try to do family work and try to engage the families as we go as well. Now, we kind of started with why I'm here, but for just a second, I want to take a half step back and sort of give a little bit of foundation about why family is so important on a more biological level. why are any of us here? When we think about us as human beings, why are any of us, uh, why did we make it? When we think about it, we are not the biggest. We're not the strongest. Like if you think about elephants, you think about ox, you think about horses. We're not the biggest. We're not the strongest. We're not the fastest. And the fastest human being on the planet can actually run better than 32 miles per hour. I can't ride a bicycle 32 miles per hour, but the fastest person on earth can. Uh, but the average cheetah more than laps them. In other words, they're running around 70 miles per hour just for the average cheetah. We're not the fastest by a long stretch. We're not the fastest by land. We're not the fastest by sea. We're not the fastest by air. We're not the most numerous. Like, think about if you kick over an anthill, how many ants are in that anthill. We're not the most numerous by a long stretch. There are other creatures that are bigger, stronger, faster, more numerous. So, how did we, in all of our glory, get to be sort of the apex predator? And there's really sort of two answers to that question. One of those is our capacity to use tools. We're not the fastest, but we can build a car. Well, not me, but people can build cars. They can build planes. They can build boats. So we have the ability to use tools to compensate for our areas where maybe we're not as strong, where maybe we're a little bit weaker. But the other thing that we have the capacity as humans to do that is really unique that other creatures in the animal kingdom do not is we have the capacity to work together with other groups who we aren't necessarily closely affiliated with, or who aren't a part of our family or our home group, based on shared interest. If you show up at a football game and there's 10,000 people in the stands, at best you might know 100 of them. But there's a collective identity because you're all gathering around this shared interest. Same if it's a music concert, right? Your favorite band's playing or your favorite group's playing, you go out to see them. You may be there with thousands of people, but you only know a few. Still, there's a shared common connection. We connect over ideas. We connect over shared passions. That ability to transcend our own small tribe, our own small group, our own small family is a uniquely human characteristic. There is no GoFundMe for chimpanzees. They don't do it that way. But we have the ability to be compassionate and to use tools to benefit others who we may not even know, which is a pretty amazing benefit when you think about it. That ability to connect with people, both people we grew up around, people who are part of our family system, and people who are not, is a really amazing capacity that oftentimes we don't really think about that much. In one sense, we're pack animals. And what I mean in that sense is that we work together offensively, if you want to use that term, to achieve goals. So we work together to get a thing done. You have a project at work, we all come together to try to get that project done. But we're also herd animals, and herd instinct or herd animals is more of a defensive posture. In that regard, conformity is very adaptive. Some of you will remember the movie The Lion King, and there's one scene in The Lion King where a group of hyenas are like watching this herd of wildebeest out in the plains, and they're hungry and they're trying to figure out which one to eat. Well, if you are a hyena and there's like this big, massive, strong wildebeest that's in the center of the herd, that is not the one that you go for, because you're going to get trampled, you're going to get kicked. It's going to go bad for you if you try to get to that big one in the middle. So what predators tend to do is look for the ones that are on the outskirts. Maybe they're sick, maybe they're older, maybe they're younger, they just can't keep up as well, and that is the easier prey. When we conform, the more closely we conform to the herd or the major group, usually the more protected we are in a sense. But if you are marginalized for any range of reasons, that could be marginalized because of creed, it could be marginalized because of ethnicity, it could be marginalized because you are differently abled. it can be marginalized for any number of reasons. What you find is that those people are more often targeted by people who are predators as well. So in that regard, that conformity really is adaptive. I'm not suggesting that it's always wise to conform. I'm just acknowledging that if you are a standard deviation away from the norm, that you are more likely to experience rejection, you're more likely to experience victimization or attack from someone. And if you are more than one standard deviation away, and here you might insert the term intersectionality. If you are uh, a black female who is a lesbian and part of a minority religious group, that is a lot of things intersecting that put you further and further away from the herd, the main dominant culture or dominant group in society. You are more likely to be marginalized, and you are more likely to experience that rejection and that isolation as well. Well, why does the isolation matter so much? Well, we begin learning that in our first pack or herd, in our family of origin. When we grow up, sometimes I'll encounter somebody, and you may have encountered some folks like this before too, who will say something brilliant. Like they'll look at you and go, I was born alone and I'm going to die alone. You know, you'll sometimes hear someone make that claim. Which sounds very independent. It sounds very rugged. But the problem is that I was there when both my daughter and my son were born. And one thing I can tell you with a mathematical certainty is that they could not have done it without my wife present. Nobody is born alone. None of us. It's not even possible to be born alone. We are born into groups. We are born into community. If we are fortunate, we live our lives within a healthy community. And if we are even more blessed, at the close of our lives, we're still surrounded by people who love us and who are part of that community. That first pack or herd, that first place where we learn, do we belong, do we fit in, or do we not, is our family of origin. That sense of connection is a need. It isn't just a want. Human beings do not make it in isolation. That isn't a thing that can even happen. If you abandon a child as an infant, the child will not survive. So we don't just academically in some theoretical nebulous way need other human beings. We need other human beings to even survive. We don't make it without other human beings. So, in a very real sense, it's about biology and it's about survival. Our ability to connect with other people is a part of why we make it or why we struggle throughout the course of our lifetime. And to illustrate that, I'm not going to do a deep dive on neurobiology. We don't have the time, and that isn't the primary focus today. But I do want to at least acknowledge a couple of things about human connection. If you've never had a primer on your brain, I find that a lot of us are doing this work where we're treating disorders of the brain. We're focusing on the mental wellness and things like that. But oftentimes we don't have just a basic understanding of the brain and how it works. First of all, I rarely mess up when I start with humility. If anybody ever tells you they understand everything there is to know about how the brain works, I would encourage you not to walk, but to run the opposite direction. Our best guesstimate is that there's about 86 billion neurons in the brain. Between those neurons are spaces called synapses, and there are multiple neurotransmitters moving back and forth between those neurons across the synapse. And if we think that we understand exactly how all that works, we're deluding ourselves. There's a lot we do not know about how the human brain works. That said, we do know a lot more than we used to. We have MRIs and PET scans and SPECT scans, all those kinds of things. Even though our brain only makes up about 2% of our body weight. So if you weigh 150 pounds, your brain's going to weigh about 3 pounds. If you weigh 200 pounds, your brain's going to weigh about 4 pounds. It burns 25% of your caloric intake. In other words, 25% of your overall energy you ingest through food is being diverted to the brain. That's an impressive amount of energy. In other words, your body prioritizes your brain more than any other organ in the body. It puts a ton of energy into keeping your brain up and running and doing the things that it's supposed to do. And when you understand sort of the primary purpose of the brain, that makes perfect sense. If you can have a heart transplant, you can have a kidney transplant, you can have a liver transplant. You can't have a brain transplant. That doesn't work. There may be people you would like to sign up for one. Don't put their name in the comments or in the chat. But the reality is we can't do that. It doesn't work in that way. Everything that our brain does is really designed toward one of two things: either helping us as individuals to survive, or to help us collectively as human beings survive. Everything the brain does is oriented toward one of those two goals, and it does it using two main systems. One of those, if you look at sort of in the center of that picture where there's a lot of color, is the limbic system. I call that the gas pedal of the brain. It's what gets us up off the couch doing the things that we need to do to help us to survive. So if you're hungry, limbic system. Thirsty, limbic system. If you have a desire to procreate and continue the species, that is a limbic system function. If you're psychoanalytic, the limbic system is physiologically speaking your id. It is not immoral, in meaning it's not trying to do the wrong thing. It is amoral. It just doesn't care about right or wrong. It wants what it wants. If you have diabetes but you love ice cream, your limbic system does not care about your diabetes. It just wants the ice cream. It just wants whatever it wants. If it had a slogan, it would be "just do it." If all we had was the limbic system, we would be in a pretty bad way. There would be a whole lot of things in society that do not work. Fortunately, we don't just have a gas pedal. We have a second system called the neocortex or prefrontal cortex that is our brakes and steering. So in other words, the gas pedal, that limbic system, gets us up doing all these things. There's all this energy, but the prefrontal cortex helps direct that energy. If you ever go on second thought, that's never a limbic system thing. That's always prefrontal cortex. Yes, I want the ice cream, but on second thought, my blood sugar was a little high the other day. Maybe I should hold off on that, or maybe only eat a tiny bit, something like that. So it helps us to navigate that system, if you will. And those two things work together to help us to survive. One of the other things that our limbic system, that gas pedal, allows us to do is to connect with other human beings. I mentioned earlier that we truly are, in a sense, wired for connection. We don't make it in isolation. Well, our brains work in such a way that we have the ability to connect with other human beings on a limbic level, on a deep emotional level, and we can read facial expressions. We can read someone's face to tell if they're angry or if they're having a bad day. If we know them really well, we can probably read that better. But even if you've never seen the person, oftentimes you can read that. As counselors, clinicians, social workers, peer support, whatever your role is, if you're working in this profession, odds are you're better than the average person at reading those things. Oftentimes, that is because one part of that limbic system, the amygdala, is trained by your experience. What does that mean? Again, I'm not going to do a deep dive here. I'll just say that most of us don't get into this profession because we arrived here on flowery beds of ease. Most of us get into this profession because we've been through some stuff. We've been wounded, we've been knocked down, we've been hurt, and hopefully we've done the work to heal and to mend on the other side of that. And because of that, we are more attuned than average to people who've been through trauma, people who've been through a hard time, people who may be really agitated in the moment. We pick up on that more readily because it's familiar on that emotional level. So that ability to connect in an emotional way, the ability to fall in love with our children when we first see them, the attraction that we may feel to somebody who may become a mate or may become a partner or a spouse at some point in life, that attraction is a limbic system function. limbic system is not good enough to maintain the relationship, but it is foundational to the beginning of the relationship and to that connection. And hopefully it does continue to exist, even though sometimes it's a prefrontal cortex. I'm deciding to love you, even though I'm annoyed with you right now. Sometimes that is a reality as well. Now, there are a number of things that dysregulate that limbic system. One of those is trauma. If you go through trauma, particularly if you do so in childhood, when the brain is more malleable, more plastic, if you will, it is more easy to mold. If you go through trauma, it tends to dysregulate your limbic system. In other words, that emotional part of the brain is not as stable. Another thing that dysregulates the limbic system is substance use. Substance use is a means of that some people use to try to regulate their limbic system, but in the end, it actually dysregulates it further, which is part of why there's such a strong correlation between trauma and addiction. In fact, the statistics, the most recent ones I've read, is that if someone shows up for addiction treatment, about 8 out of 10, about 80% of those folks have a background of trauma. Oftentimes, the lens we view that through is somebody with a dysregulated limbic system is using substances as a means to try to regulate it. Not a very effective long-term goal, but sometimes the short term is what a person is working with. That can be a part of that. That's also, incidentally, part of why you see some treatment modalities being used in addiction treatment that we may not have seen historically. For instance, another disorder that is considered a dysregulation of the limbic system, that is considered what the disease is borderline personality disorder. That's considered a dysregulation of the limbic system. The other disorder that is considered a dysregulation of the limbic system is addiction. And that's why, even though Marsha Linehan said DBT is not recommended for addiction treatment, that is why you see some of the tools of DBT and skills of DBT being used in addiction treatment. That's why mindful practice has become very popular or very often used as a part of addiction treatment, because it helps regulate that limbic system to calm down and smooth out that your limbic system. That's an important skill that people can develop and can have as well. There's a lot more I could say there, but I want to move on to make sure we get to some more of the heart of what we're here to discuss today. The key that I do want to drive home is that there are several things that dysregulate the limbic system, but a dysregulated limbic system cannot be adequately addressed by information, education, or legislation. Put another way, oftentimes for probably the past 15, 20 years, when I've interviewed somebody for a counselor position and I ask them, what's your primary treatment modality? Like, what do you use? The answer about 99% of the time is CBT. Sometimes it's a RBT or a DBT, something like that. And those are good modalities. Please don't take this as a critique against them. It's not intended as that at all. But if you think of the brain as being, think of the limbic system like being a powerful horse, and the prefrontal cortex as being the jockey, right? If you want to win the horse race, you need a strong horse and a good jockey. For years, what we've been doing in the clinical realm is training the jockey, training the jockey, training the jockey. What does that mean? Identify your stinking thinking, your thought distortions, your irrational thoughts. We've focused on that as though addressing those things will fix the problem. But when it comes to trauma, when it comes to addiction, does stinking thinking and irrational thoughts, do those things exist? Absolutely. They exist. But they are symptoms of the disorder and not the disorder. At its heart, addiction is a dysregulation of the limbic system, that craving part of the brain, that survival pathway that sometimes gets, you'll hear the word hijacked or gets misled by substances. You can educate that till the cows come home, but it won't always make a difference in terms of the person's behavior. That is a really important thing to consider. So by all means, train the jockey, but we also have to be intentional in teaching people how to calm down the horse, how to regulate the horse, how do you guide the horse and keep it healthy. That includes things that impact the limbic system, like healthy relationships, like uh, art and music, like mindful practice, like a true interpersonal group process. Those are more limbic interventions that can really make a significant difference. It's also why you can educate somebody deeply and then they go and they understand it in your office. They understand it perfect while they're in your program. But the problem is their goal isn't just staying sober in your program. The goal is, how do they stay sober when they get back home? How do they stay sober when they get back around their friends or in the community? When that emotional, that limbic pull from your friends or family is so strong, that's where we have to really focus in to help them build skills to both train the jockey and calm down the horse, if you will. So that attachment style and the brain really makes a difference. That family of origin sort of sets the framework for how we're going to engage with other people throughout the course of our lifetime. And one thing is important to know is clinically, despite everything that we've learned and all those techniques and skills and certifications and licenses and evidence-based practices that hopefully we do work to learn, we learn to work to implement, it is still the therapeutic relationship that matters the most. That's not like a feel good, touchy feely idea. There's actually really good research behind that. If you're curious or want to do a deep dive on that, I would point you to the work of Scott Miller, who really demonstrated that it doesn't matter which of the evidence-based practices you use. The greatest predictor of whether someone's going to continue to engage in treatment or recovery, the greatest indicator of whether someone is going to continue to meet treatment objectives or going to continue toward their path to recovery is the therapeutic relationship with the human being that you're working with. That is the number one predictor. And we kind of know that, don't we? Like if you think about teachers that you had in school, there are probably some teachers that you had who maybe you're like, they should have never taught. It's not like they should have retired, like they should have just never taught. There are other teachers, though, that even though the subject may not have been your favorite subject, you really like that teacher and you worked really hard in their class and you enjoyed the class, not because of the subject, but because of who they were. That is oftentimes some of the dynamic that is present with us, and hopefully why we use those good skill sets to build a healthy therapeutic rapport. Things like motivational interviewing and person centered treatment, those are parts of that. So, what are some of the treatment implications for that? First is that you have to be healthy yourself. Going back to that earlier statement that we can only reproduce what we are, that's really scary to me when I think about the mental health state of many of the mental health or behavioral health practitioners I work with. The bottom line of that is, since we can only reproduce what we are, we cannot help a client get healthier than we are ourselves. Uh, Part of that is because they hear what we say, but they also see what we do. They see if we're worn out and ragged and tired. They can tell because they're better than average at reading people too. They've been through some stuff. They pick up on those cues a little bit better than the average. I always used to say when I worked residential, if I ever walked into the residential program and didn't happen to be wearing my wedding band that day, they would have me divorced by the time I got down the hall. Like they pay attention to stuff in a way that many people do not. They are attuned to things in a way that many people are not. For us, the key is that we really do have to make sure we are staying healthy emotionally, physically, as much as possible, that we are staying well. I'll take that one step forward and then I'll leave it alone. Uh, if you are um, telling people to have a self care plan and you are not practicing self care, I'm not asking if you have a self care plan because we're therapists and we can make that sound real good, right? But if you're not practicing self care, that's just a polite way of saying hypocrite. Self care is a part of every ethical code of ethics in behavioral health. It's not just a good idea, it's an ethical obligation. Please take good care of you. Please make sure that you are as healthy as you can possibly be, not just for yourself, though that is reason enough, but also so you can be as effective as possible with those that you're there to serve. And as you are healthy yourself, then if you have the courage, appropriately love your patients, and they may learn how to love themselves. Now, let me press pause here because some of you heard that word love and you were like, that's probably an appropriate response in some regards. Do not start telling your clients that you love them. The reason for that is that they may have a good, healthy understanding of what love is, but love may be something that their perpetrator whispered to them when they crawled in bed to molest them. You don't always know what someone's experience is. So do not throw out the word, I love you. And sometimes you'll have a client, particularly if you work with younger kids and stuff like that, they'll say, I love you. And the response I always give to that is, thank you. Can you tell me what that means to you? And they go, usually they'll say something like, well, I just really appreciate you, or I really like you, or something like that. And it's fine to just go, well, I really appreciate you too. Thank you. That's sort of a way around that. If you're not comfortable with the word love, that's not a problem. Take it out and replace it with unconditional positive regard. Just borrow from Carl Rogers there, that you're going to see the value and the worth in other human beings, even on their bad days. That's a really good place to start. So what are some other implications? Well, number one is that our basic assumptions will change. Like we have this idea that we are treating the client in front of us and that that's our only responsibility. But if we ignore all of the social context, we ignore the family, we ignore the community, we ignore the peer group, we are doing a disservice to our clients. So we really do have to have a broader lens that we are seeing the world through. Doesn't mean we can impact them. Sometimes when I'm doing therapy, I have to say the serenity prayer, right? There are things that I can change. There are things that I cannot. That families will be admitted to treatment, not just individuals. Now, I acknowledge that that doesn't always work in terms of reimbursement. Sometimes your identified patient or client has to be an individual, and that's fine. But if you have the capacity to impact the family, your gains are more likely to continue. They're more likely to outlive the treatment episode. Of course, using motivational enhancement techniques, motivational interviewing is a really good way to help build some of that therapeutic rapport and to reduce shame. And we'll say more about shame a little bit later on. Acknowledge transference and countertransference. What do I mean by that? I'm not trying to be complicated here. Let me say it like this. We hopefully are trying to treat every client to the best of our ability. But if we're honest, we do not like all of our clients the same amount. There are some clients, when we see them coming, we think, thank goodness they made it back. And there's some clients, when we see them come through the door, we go, oh no, here we go again. On an emotional level, all of our clients don't hit us the same way. That also oftentimes is what leads to problems ethically, if we want to get down to that. Anytime you find yourself having a strong emotional response to a client, positive, where you want to help them any way possible, even if that means fudging the rules, or negative, where you're ready to kick them out on day one, that is a really good time to seek out some good clinical supervision. Because the truth of the matter is that probably has very little to do with the client. The client reminds you of someone limbically, emotionally, that maybe was a part of your family of origin. Maybe it was a brother. Maybe it was you at a younger age. But someone that you feel a strong connection to, positive or negative, is probably who they're reminding you of. Likewise, not every client's going to like you the same way. So we've probably all had the experience where some client we had or patient that we had walked through the door, took one look at us and went, nope, not happening. I don't like this person, not going to work with this person. We don't have to take that personal, because just like in our instance, the same is probably true for them. We remind them of somebody who for them they have strong emotional response or reaction to. Acknowledging that is a way of showing value to that past experience and to acknowledge our own past experience. And treatment environments, if we're really trying to engage families and engage the broader system, will be more welcoming. I do a lot of consultant work. And so sometimes I will get asked to come in and to evaluate a program, and they'll tell me, oh, we do all this great work with families. And then I come in and, to see the program. And lo and behold, there's like two hard chairs in the waiting area. There's nothing there for kids, like for little kids. And they're telling me they're doing great family work. Or then I go into the office of a counselor who tells me they're doing great family work, and there is a chair, like the counselor chair, which incidentally is usually big and floofy and comfortable, and one hard little chair for the client. And you're telling me you do great family work. Well, so I'll ask, well, where do you do this great family work? Oh, well, we just pull a chair in from the lobby. First of all, do none of these people have younger kids? Do none of if you're working with adolescents, do they not have any younger siblings? They need something to occupy themselves in the waiting room, something that's age appropriate, something that is hopefully trauma informed as well. But the reality is, when families do show up, if we have to start pulling in chairs, that sends a message that we really didn't expect them to come, that we're really not prepared for them. That can be a really powerful thing as well. So making sure those environments are welcoming, and also that we're not hostile to families. We'll say more about that in just a bit. So when we start talking about defining family roles and rules, the way I oftentimes have heard this said is, there are functional families and dysfunctional families. I don't believe that. What I really do believe 100% is that we are all somewhere on a continuum of functionality. Somewhere on the far left is the least functional family in the history of the world, and somewhere on the far right is the most functional family in the history of the world. But the reality is that even the most functional family on earth has some dysfunction in it. And even the most dysfunctional family on earth has some degree of functionality, or the members wouldn't have made it. They wouldn't have survived. They wouldn't even know to identify that as a family. So the reason I think that is important, and again, if you want to do a deep dive on this, this is called a trait mindset versus a growth mindset. If we just say that families are dysfunctional, that's a label. You can't change the label. If you have a growth mindset where you say they're a family with dysfunctional traits, well, they can learn skills to become more functional. So we're not trying to label, we're trying to help. We're trying to come alongside. Likewise, within our own families, it's easy to just go, well, I came from a functional or a dysfunctional family. I really do think it's helpful to take a half step back and sift out by degrees a little bit in that regard as well, to consider that what was some dysfunction that may have been in my otherwise functional family, or even though my family was dysfunctional, what's some functionality that was there. Within functional or healthy families, and I debated cutting these out because I know in terms of time, we'll be a little pressed for time with the content today, but we spend so much time focused on the less healthy aspects of family within our profession. I did want to take a moment just to acknowledge functional, healthy families or traits thereof. It's, in a sense, it's sort of the healthy soil out of which healthy individuals can grow and become more mature human beings. In a functional family, like, problems are actually acknowledged and resolved. We don't pretend they don't exist, and we actually work together to fix the problem. That all members can express how they feel, their perceptions, how they see things, their thoughts, desires, their fantasies, their dreams. What do they hope for? That all members can express that. That relationships are dialogical and equal. In other words, you can have a conversation obviously you don't have it the same way with a 3-year-old as you do with a 30-year-old or even a 13-year-old, but that you're having dialogue, that you are listening to the other person, that the person has equal value in terms of their opinions having worth and validity. It doesn't mean that you abdicate your role if you are the caregiver, if you are the parent in that situation. You don't abdicate the fact that you have a degree of authority or a degree of responsibility. But at the same time, you hear out the needs and desires and wants of the child. That communication is direct, meaning that you don't do all this guesswork, that people are clear, that they're congruent. Like if you're saying, I'm so sorry, but you're smiling while you're saying it, Those two things don't go together. That your affect, your face matches what you're saying. And sensory based, that in other words, uh, they can really see, hear in your tone of voice, all those things that you're not being fake, you're not being sarcastic, you're being real. Uh, that is a really healthy trait within families. That family members can actually get their needs met. That they, number one, they feel open and free enough to ask when they need something, and that those needs will then be considered and met. That family members can be different. Not everybody has to be exactly the same, and they can still be a part of the family. We don't vote them out of the family just because, I don't know, they may have a different political leaning than us, or they may not adhere to the same faith in the same way that we do. That parents do what they say and are self-disciplined disciplinarians. In other words, of course, the parents do need to guide, they need to direct, they need to communicate. Sometimes they need to discipline the children, but when they do that, they don't do it in a way that is reactionary, flies off the handle, etc. They do so in a very self-disciplined way. That family roles are chosen and are flexible. In other words, the opposite of that would be if someone is told, no, you are the smart one. No, you are the cute one. No, you are the athletic one. Oftentimes people are put into roles by their family and they can't get out of them. They kind of feel locked in that role. In a healthier family, the roles are chosen. You choose what your role is. You choose what it is that you do. You choose how you contribute, particularly as you get older and at a place where you can think a bit more abstractly. That atmosphere is hopefully fun and spontaneous. Like, one of the best parts about a healthy family is just laughing together, having a good time, having positive shared experiences together. Those are all really powerful, healthy, strong things. Dysfunctional or less functional family traits, on the other side, is that problems are often denied. There's either fusion, where everybody just agrees not to disagree. In other words, I don't agree, but I'm just going to shut up. Or withdrawal, where, you know what, I'm just not going to deal with you folks at all. I'm just going to go over here. I'm going to do my thing. You do your thing. You do you. I'm going to do me. That's it. So oftentimes in less functional families, that's one of the traits that you see. Also, when you get pretty far over into that less functional aspects of family dynamics, oftentimes it comes down to boundaries. We hear a lot about boundaries in our profession, and a couple things about those is that those boundaries can get unhealthy in two different directions, if you will. Sometimes the boundaries are super duper rigid, meaning this is the rule, this is the guideline, and if you cross that line, you're out. Sorry. Uh, and on the opposite end, and I'll bring this together in a minute, is enmeshed boundaries, where the boundaries are super porous. In other words, there's almost a group think dynamic happening. One person gets a cold and the other person has already called out sick because they're going to be home taking care of them while they have a cold. That kind of a dynamic. Neither of those are particularly healthy in and of themselves. In the family that I grew up in, it had very rigid boundaries. Well, what does that mean when I say we had rigid boundaries? Well, we all loved one another, but in a sense, we were kind of like people who happened to share a house, but didn't have a whole lot else in common in some ways. We weren't really tight in that way. We were a group of individuals, if you want to think of it in that capacity. In my wife's family, the boundaries are very porous, meaning it blew my mind the first time that as a married couple, we went over to her parents' house and nobody knocked before they came in. Like, that just would never happen in a family with rigid boundaries. Both of those are not particularly healthy, not particularly functional. They're just dysfunctional in different ways. I always laugh and say it like this, my family, my wife's family and my family are both not particularly healthy, but hers is like Dr. Phil not healthy and mine is Springer not healthy. There are degrees in that mix. That's part of that continuum as well. So in a healthy family system, people can set and hold boundaries, but they can also acknowledge that there are times when the person means more than the boundary does, and I need to try to adjust. That we still are able to connect on an emotional level and maintain our boundaries at the same time, that we are both structured and nurtured. Now, the reason I spend a little bit of time there is one of the things I see clinically happen often is that as a clinician, particularly for new clinicians, you probably lean one of those two ways with regard to your boundaries. You probably either have really strong, rigid boundaries or very porous, loose boundaries. Those usually are a reflection of the family that you grew up in. And people who have very rigid boundaries are often very structure oriented. These people are like, my way or the highway, get right, get left, get on the train or not, but we're leaving the station. These are the people who, in a positive sense, they keep the trains running on time. People know exactly what to expect. There's no lack of clarity there. If they say the group starts at 11 and you show up at 11:05, you don't even knock because you know you ain't getting in. That kind of a thing is a part of that where it's very rigid. On the more porous side, that's the more nurturing people. That's the people who are, can't we give them just one more chance? Can't we adjust? I know the rule says this, but we really would serve them better if we did that. Um, the two most annoyed and stressed out people in your treatment team are the people on the furthest ends of that continuum between structure and nurture. Now, if you are a very structured person, odds are better than average that you present to your clients as angry. You may even hear them sometimes go, "Why are you mad? Why are you being hateful?" They may say things like that. You often present as angry. If you have very porous boundaries and you don't set and hold boundaries and people cross your boundaries without any repercussions, you often present as scared, that you're not willing to hold a boundary. Maybe you're scared of rejection. Maybe you're scared they'll get loud, whatever, but you present as scared. And in terms of forming a healthy therapeutic relationship with those we serve, angry or scared, neither one is particularly helpful in terms of establishing a healthy relationship or rapport with that client. So we have to work towards being closer to the middle of that. There's a lot more that we could say there, and I'll just give a nod that direction again as food for thought. Your own personal alignment and your workplace may or may not line up very well. If you're a strong nurturer, if you tend to have more porous boundaries and you go to work for probation, parole, and pardon, you're probably going to have a tough time there. If you have very rigid boundaries and you're trying to work at a daycare, you're probably going to have a really hard time. It doesn't mean you can't do the job, but it's like driving your tires when they're not aligned. When your tires are out of alignment, you can drive on them. It just wears them out a lot quicker. When you're working in a capacity that is not aligned with your own bent, you can do the job, but you're going to be tireder than everybody else who's doing the same job. It wears you out more quickly. Again, just food for thought there. So in enmeshed families, those with porous boundaries, small problems often reverberate throughout the whole system. If one person is having a bad day, everybody's having a bad day. In rigid detached families, big problems are often ignored. Somebody has a heart attack and you don't find out about it till 2 weeks later. That kind of thing is apt to happen in a place or in a family where there are more rigid boundaries as well. So as we consider the family, it's not really the conversation that holds families together. We have conversations, we talk, we connect, and we discuss ideas, and we discuss the news or the weather or whatever else, but that's not really what holds us together. It's also not shared beliefs that is sort of the cement for the family, although that can help. The reality is, in a healthy family, you might have both Democrats and Republicans at the table. You might have someone who is Christian and who is Muslim at the table. So it does help in terms of connection if we happen to have some shared beliefs or at least shared understanding of those beliefs. But that in and of itself is also not the cement that holds us. It's not intellect that binds us to one another. It's not just that we all agree on the same ideas or are all studying and doing research together. It's really that shared emotional communication over time that makes us feel like family. We call that limbic resonance. We have We sort of attune to the people around us, and there's neurological reasons for that with mirror neurons and things of that nature as well. But we tend to mirror and connect with those people around us and take on attributes of those around us over time. So, what is the part of the application for that clinically? Well, imagine with me, if you will, a 12-year-old girl who grows up in a household with a male adult who is addicted to alcohol and who is abusive. And his pattern is he comes in from work, he starts drinking. By later that evening, he starts to get loud. And by the nighttime, he becomes abusive toward the mother. And the 12-year-old girl sees that. She's growing up in that household and she swears, God is my witness, I will never marry a man like my father or like this guy. I'll never marry somebody like that. And she means it to her heart of hearts. She means it. Uh, let's say that she survives that household. She goes off to college. It's a 4-year state school of your choice. And while she's there, she gets invited to a frat party. She goes to this frat party, and there are 100 eligible bachelors in the room. I mean, it's raining men. Hallelujah. They're everywhere. Uh, all these guys are there, but if she is not careful, she will find herself attracted to the man or men in that room who are either already or who are most likely to become addicted to alcohol and or abusive. And it's not because she is unintelligent. It's because he feels like home. There's a sense of competency in that relationship, if you will. There's a sense of connection, of understanding how that relationship works that can be really powerful. That is also part of why we find ourselves attracted to certain people. Just because you're attracted to somebody does not mean you have to act on it. We've all been attracted to somebody who either was or would have been an absolute train wreck. Some of us married them, right? You know, you might have married somebody who was your train wreck. But the reality is that we're often attracted to things because there's some similarities in emotional feel to the family we grew up in. In pop culture, we often hear that phrased as men marry a woman who is like their mom, or that girls marry a guy who are like their dad. You know, those are, again, pretty traditional statements that you hear thrown out there, but that's sort of some of the grain of truth that is in that mix sometimes. We'll cover just this section, and that will bring us up to the point of a break. So here we're going to actually borrow from a gentleman by the name of Heinz Kohut. He wrote a very long, very thick book that talked about needs that, in his case, he was talking about that babies have. And these were in addition to like food, shelter, clothing. He said these were additional needs that babies have. Now, I said and grown folks because I really don't believe we ever outgrow these needs. The first of those is a narcissistic need. In other words, we have a need to be mirrored. That's the language that was used at the time. So it's not narcissistic as in diagnostically. It's drawing from mythology with the myth of Narcissus falling in love with his own reflection. We have that need to be mirrored by other people. If you smile, you expect someone to smile back. There's a lot more I could say there, but that's sort of the bottom line. If someone cares about you and you know they care about you and you're telling them about a bad day that you had and how terrible it was, you don't expect them to be grinning at you. Or if you come in and you're telling them how great your life is and they're crying, then something's off there. There's a disconnect. Exhibitionistic means we have a need to be seen, to be acknowledged, to just be noted as being present. And in addition to that is a grandiose need, the need to be seen as wonderful, as having an innate worth, innate value. So according to Kohut, we had the need to be mirrored, the need to be seen, and the need to be seen as wonderful. And when those things are met because of good enough parenting, not perfect parenting, it just means that the child, the baby, was mirrored often enough, that they were seen as good and having worth and having value, that there was mirroring, that empathetic attending, that the parent was attuned to them, that it was a safe place, that it was consistent, that they were soothing, that the end result was a healthy self-object. What is a healthy self-object? It means they have a good sense of who they are and what they are about. They have a healthy sense of self. So they have healthy self-esteem, if you will, some appropriate ambition. They think that they can get things done, that they can make an impact, some enthusiasm for life, some sense of excitement about being a part of the world, and a sense of wholeness, that they're intact, like their sort of integrity within themselves. They hold together. Personal ideals. They hold things that they believe are important and that they're willing to stand up for. They have the ability to identify feelings. Uh, Hopefully, they've gotten that instruction in a healthy way as well. And we see that even with a baby when they're crying, and the caregiver looks down and goes, "Oh, you're sad. Why are you so sad?" You're beginning to educate by mirroring, seeing, and seeing is wonderful. And there's an internal sense of safety, that the world is basically an okay place. It's not perfect, but good things are more likely to happen to me. And there's an ability to self-soothe as well, that the caretaker may soothe, but in addition to that, we may soothe ourselves. On the others, or the overall end objective of that is a healthy self-object, healthy attachment, clear boundaries, and a cohesive sense of self. Again, you have a good sense of who you are. You're not going to put up with someone mistreating you, because you know you have worth, you know you have value, etc. Now, we're at a time boundary where I told you where we're going to take a short break. We are indeed going to take about a 10-minute break to give you just a chance to get up, stretch your legs, use the restroom if you need to. Please do not sign out of the Zoom. Again, keep in mind that you have to be present for 90% of the time. So this time still is running. If you log out and log back in, it will deduct that time. Remain logged in, but we're going to take a 10-minute break. I look forward to seeing you back in 10 minutes when we finish balancing out the scales and talk about rocking the roles in families with impacted by substance use disorder. Thank you.
She's going through all these questions. What kind of family do you want? Do you want brothers? Do you want sisters? Do you just... She's going through all these questions. What kind of family do you want? Do you want brothers? Do you want sisters? Do you just want brothers? Or what mix do you want? What religion do you prefer? Is it okay if I can't get you in the same school but get you around the same area? I didn't know any false family that take in a 17-year-old kid. It was too much of a struggle. They're not going to find anybody to take me in. It all started when I was around 9 years old. I had a mom that was hooked on drugs and just hooked on a lifestyle. Wasn't a normal kid at 9. I was pretty angry, pretty frustrated. It's kind of rough being a young kid and coming in and having your mom all strung out, and not knowing what to do. I went and lived with my grandparents. They were like my lifesavers. It was me and my sister that grew up in the house together. My sister, she had cystic fibrosis. If you ever know anything, you get that feeling like something's wrong with something when some stuff usually don't happen. Like I never got taken out of school. So when they call me down to the office, I go, what's going on? I'm in the car with my grandma and I'm praying. I'm like, God, please don't take my sister away from me. I got home and I look at my grandpa and I said, how's Liz doing? He goes, sorry to tell you, but she ain't no longer with us. It was hard, me being 13 years old. That was the first meeting with death that I had. A few years down the road, I'm 16 and everything's doing good. I have the counseling going. I have all the other stuff going, the grief counseling, the anger management. And I got home because my grandma was usually home by 3 or 3:30 every day, and I knew something was wrong because she wasn't home. And I finally called the hospital, and they say, Mr. Shaw, you need to get down here quick. So I'm praying again in the car with my grandpa, praying, Lord, just don't take my mom away from me. I mean, that's what I knew my grandparents as. My grandpa was dad, my grandma was mom. They take me and my grandpa into this room. He said, Mr. Shaw, I'm sorry to tell you, but your wife's gone. I didn't know how to deal with it. A 16-year-old kid, I couldn't take care of a 60-year-old man by myself. So I'm on the phone, I got a case manager. So I'm trusting her. She's going through all these questions with me. She's going through, what's your idea of a family? Where do you want to live at? Do you want to stay at home? Do you want to go to a different school? Or is it okay if I can't get you in the same school but get you around the same area where you can still go down and see grandpa and, still have that relationship with your grandpa that you needed? I didn't know any false family that take in a 17-year-old kid. And for me, my rap sheet was a mile long of the problems I had. I'm thinking, this ain't gonna be good. They're not gonna do it. They're not gonna find anybody to take me in. Well, here comes Jerry and Jenny. Best two people I've ever met in my life that are foster parents with Sunrise step into my life. Throughout the counseling process with Sunrise, their therapists, their case managers, and just the whole support system. I figured I did not only just have my foster parents I could lean on, but I had the workers at Sunrise also. I've had a lot given to me, and I feel like I should give back a lot more. I'm in school for nursing, trying to do something positive with my life, and not being what the world plans me out to be. And not following the direction of my mom and the path she went down. It was just, it's just a way that, God blesses you when you shouldn't be blessed. Everybody has always helped me and gave me that support system, and always, I've always had people when I needed them. I just want to be that blessing to other people. My name is Aaron Green. I'm 21. I have hope. I have a family. I'm studying to be a nurse, all because Sunrise found me.
We have about 1 more minute and then we'll get started back. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break, got a good chance to stretch your legs, and also got a good word from some of our sponsors, as well as got a chance to see a video clip. Certainly hope that you enjoyed that. There's so many great sponsors that help make Kentucky Systems of Care possible. I encourage you to check out the website or to check out some of the emails you may be getting that let you know a little bit more about those sponsors. We really appreciate it, them making it possible for us to meet as we are. I don't think I said this specifically in the beginning, but if you do have questions, be sure to put those in the Q&A. By all means, we'll try to leave a little bit of time at the end in case there are questions, but we do want to move forward at a fairly quick pace. As when we left off, we were talking about the fact that if you grow up in a place where you're mirrored, seen, and seen as having great worth, that the end result is that you have a healthy self-object, a healthy sense of self, that you know you have worth and value in the world, that you can make a difference in the world. Those are some really powerful messages, some really powerful belief systems to carry us forward in life. Sometimes, however, not good enough parenting takes place. Now, this does not mean that the parents are completely devoid of parenting skills. It just means that they're not able to mirror, see, or see as wonderful their child as often as they might otherwise do. Now, this could be for a wide range of reasons. It may just be being able to be present. Sometimes it may be a single parent who's just not able to be present as much. Sometimes maybe there's alcohol or drug use in the home. Maybe there's mental health issues within the home. Maybe there's an incarceration. There can be a wide range of reasons why there might not be good enough parenting. And it doesn't mean that it's horrible parenting. It just means that those needs to be mirrored, seen, and seen as wonderful don't happen often enough. When that's the case, often there are feelings of inadequacy or emptiness. There's often a need for approval. They're looking for external approval, someone to tell them that they're okay. There's often a need to control. Oftentimes they will try to control things that may not be within their control, which can lead to some frustration, insecurity, or an ill-defined sense of self. They're not real sure who they are. If you think back to, this is an old movie now, but My Best Friend's Wedding, the whole scene with Julia Roberts, who doesn't know how she likes her eggs because she always just ate her eggs, however, whoever she was dating took them. That lack of a sense of just your own preferences and knowing your own mind. Unclear personal values. Again, you're not real sure what you think or what you believe. Oftentimes, though, it can also lead to some black-white thinking that this is definitely right, this is wrong. That there's, again, those rigid boundaries can kick in. Again, a need for external reassurance or an inability to self-soothe, to be able to calm yourself down, to help regulate your own anxiety or stress or those kinds of things can be a little bit of a stretch. And ultimately, there's sort of a failure of attachment. If you're not mirrored, seen, or seen as wonderful enough, then is that really a safe place? Do I really connect? That can be a real challenge. That boundaries can be unclear. Maybe the person's really supportive when they're there, but they're not there very often. And it can lead to a fractured sense of selves where, do you know your own worth or value, or are you looking for someone to assign that to you? And ultimately, when you have that not good enough parenting, what I expected him to say is that you have an unhealthy self-object. If you have a healthy self-object when you get those things met, I expect him to say you have an unhealthy self-object when they're not. But instead, what Kohut said is that what we have is shame. Now, again, if you want to do a deep dive into shame, I would point you toward Brene Brown, who does wonderful work in that area. She is a researcher, but she is a researcher who can talk sense and that you can understand. So I really appreciate that. But for our purposes today, we'll just say that shame is an idea that you are not enough. Not what enough? Well, not whatever enough. That you are not smart enough, that you are not pretty enough, that you are rich enough, that you are not intelligent enough, that you are not strong enough, that you are not black enough, that you are not white enough, that you're not devout enough, that you're not gay enough, that you're not straight enough. There are always these messages that oftentimes say that you are somehow been weighed and measured and found lacking. That is the idea behind shame. Well, what does that look like in terms of treatment? That need for external approval often looks like the person who is always showing up early for the pre-session session and wants to stay 15 minutes after the group and hang out. Or they're like, you look up if you're doing residential and they're in your door frame every time you look up. They're looking for that external approval, that external sense of connection. Oftentimes there can be a strong sense of comparison with others. So I've seen this even look at, these are in adult groups where if some people get a negative drug screen back, it's clear, they put a smiley face on it, and they give somebody their drug test back and forgot to put a smiley face on it. They're like, where's my smiley face? You gave them a smiley face. There's going to be an unhealthy sense of comparison, a preoccupation with, am I getting what's fair? Am I getting what everybody else is getting? Or do they like that person more than me? That oftentimes can play out in that way. Now, guilt and shame are, of course, not the same thing. A little bit of guilt is a good thing. If you do something and it hurts somebody, I hope that bothers your conscience a little bit, that you have a sense of guilt. If you have a total lack of guilt, that's actually pathological. Like if you hurt people and it doesn't bother you, there are diagnoses for that. But feeling guilty is about what you have done. It's not about who you are. Again, it's that difference between a trait mindset and a growth mindset. Guilt says, I screwed up. Shame says, I am a screw up. So shame is really about identity and not about behavior. When we have a shame structure that really sort of underpins our upbringing, oftentimes we really believe that at our core, we are bad, that we are screw ups. And therefore, I have to earn my value. Sometimes it will look like that. To be good, I have to do good and do a lot of it. I have to earn my worth. A deep need for constant external approval. Again, you're always looking for someone to tell you that you're okay or that you did a good job. A persistent fear of punishment. You always are waiting on someone to criticize. You're waiting on the other shoe to fall, so to speak. That comparison of, do I measure up? Am I doing as good as so-and-so? Oftentimes there's an extreme sensitivity to what others are expecting. You always want to know what other people want from you so you can try to be that, so you can try to meet that. And oftentimes it can lead to people pleasing, where you're trying to give or be what everybody else wants you to be, whether that's true to your nature or not. You just want to make other people happy, make them like you, if you will. So there's that belief that it's never enough. No matter what I do, it is never going to be enough. And it can lead to a lot of behaviors that are not real healthy. When we don't feel like we are enough, that we have to earn our worth or earn our value. For some people, that translates to workaholism or perfectionism, where we literally try to earn our value by how much we make, by how indispensable we are at work, or by perfectionism, getting everything perfect all the time. As long as I can do everything perfectly, then I'll get the approval of others, and therefore I'll have worth and value. Or sometimes you get the opposite, where if somebody thinks no matter what I do, I'm not going to measure up, they're like, you know what, rather than get rejected for not being good enough in this particular area, I'll just always be late. And that way everybody will just know, that, oh, well, that's just him. That's just who it is. It can be like self-defeating rituals, things we do repeatedly over and over that are not healthy. They don't end well, and yet we find ourselves compelled to do them. Or addictions. The way I sometimes put that with regard to shame is for the person who is deeply shame-based, where they don't have a healthy sense of who they are, they have more of a fractured sense of self. It's like driving and pouring down torrential rain. The rain is falling so thick that all you can do is follow the taillights in front of you and hope they don't go off a cliff, right? That terrible feeling of driving in the stressed out pouring rain. And in the midst of that rain, you have the best 2 seconds of driving known to humanity, because you go under an overpass. And for 2 seconds in the midst of that storm, it's quiet. For the person who is deeply shame-based, the first time they get high, the first time they drink, it's like going under the underpass sometimes. So you will oftentimes hear people say, like, I'm not using to feel good, I'm using to feel normal. That can be a part of that as well. And in that analogy, addiction is essentially deciding to park under the bridge to just try to stay out of the storm as frequently as you can. The problem is the storm isn't going anywhere. It's still pouring rain, and if you don't eventually figure out how to navigate that storm and to reduce it, it just stays there. Often there's that sense of hypervigilance, that need for control. And that can take all kinds of forms, trying to control that. Well, let me just put it like this. In my own life, that is an area that I had to do a lot of work because I found myself getting frustrated a lot for a lot of years. And what I noticed is that oftentimes I was frustrated because other people were not doing what I wanted them to do, what clearly I thought was a better idea for them to do. And so for myself, I had to rewrite the serenity prayer for myself. For me, that looks like, God, give me the courage to change myself. Give me the serenity to accept other people and the wisdom to know the difference. For me, that was revolutionary. That helped me out. So in that regard, we have to sometimes release or relinquish that control and quit trying to control and dictate what other people do. You will be happier, and the people around you will likely be a lot happier as well. This is a quote from a mentor of mine, one of the people who has taught me the most over the years about addiction and family and a wide range of topics, named Jeff Georgi, who's located in North Carolina. His statement was, and it took me a while to understand this: the gift of shame gives birth to obligation, which is always the safer side of freedom. I've read this thing for probably 5 years before I had any idea what he was talking about. And the short version of it is that shame is always a gift. In other words, babies don't come into this world thinking they are inadequate. They're not enough. In fact, babies tend to come into the world thinking they are the universe and everybody needs to conform to their will. But somewhere along the line, we are told that we are not enough, that we're not smart enough, that we're not pretty enough, that we're not rich enough, that we're not whatever enough. We're told that and given the gift of shame. Well, when we get that gift of shame, if we think we can earn the affections of another, if we think that we can do everything perfect in perfectionism, or work enough hours in workaholism, or earn enough, or whatever variation of how we're trying to do that, that feels like the safer side of freedom. Because if I work 80 hours, you'll love me. I can dictate whether I work 80 hours or not. But what happens if you work 85 and they still don't love you? It's an illusion. It doesn't really work that way. And so we spend sometimes a lifetime trying to earn our worth from people who don't have the capacity to acknowledge our worth. That can be a really important distinction to make. So within our own family, sometimes we're told that we're not whatever enough. And sometimes the messages are true. Like I'm 6'0" with like a 1-inch vertical and no distinguishable athletic skill. That is who I am. So if you tell me I'm not athletic enough to join the NBA, I'm going to agree with you. Yeah, right. And you don't see me out there trying out for the NBA. I'm cool with that. The key is when you understand that you've been given the gift of shame, it allows you and affords you the opportunity to decide whether you keep that gift. In the case of athleticism, I'm cool with that. But there are other things that if you told me I was not good enough in that area, we'd have a problem because I disagree. You may not see my worth in that area, but I do. That can be an important distinction and an important way of thinking through that. So what do we do in the face of that? We use this word love earlier. And again, I cautioned you then, don't start telling your clients that you love them. But when you think about your own family dynamics, you probably have love for your family. And we're often say love must be tough or all those sort of things, but love is not tough and hard and ambivalent or frustrating, exhausting, lonely, confusing, infuriating, inconsistent, demanding, gentle, kind, clear, natural, sensible, warm, exciting, easy, forgiving, connecting, supportive, understanding. Love is all of the above. It is hard and it is warm and it is exhausting and it is supportive. In families, all of those things exist. It's not just one. Even the people you love the most in the world will on some days get on your very last nerve. That is the nature of family. And sometimes families are especially adept at knowing your buttons and pushing them, knowing the things that will get a reaction out of you, and choosing to press that button, if you will, to get that reaction. That is part of the nature of families, for better or for worse. So, what do we do? Well, what we start doing is, again, back to using the phrase unconditional positive regard. Part of what we do is begin to see the worth and the value of every person that we serve, that we come alongside, that we care for, that we really do deliberately uh, shine a spotlight on the positives of those who we have the privilege of working with. Oftentimes, that hasn't been done very much, if at all. And so when you can see the positive in those that we work with, it really begins to challenge their shame that oftentimes comes from that family of origin, just not because, again, the parent or caregiver were horrible and terrible people, but because they're human. They're fallible human beings who have bad days and who have too many demands on their time and all those things that we know we all experience in the course of our own family lives as well. This sort of leads the way, or paves the way, to the idea of the family disease model. And some of you probably encountered this a lot. We're not going to spend a ton of time here, but oftentimes with that family disease model, it was really the major model used in family therapy, particularly related to substance use. It also was the first time you really start to see other family members, other than the person struggling with addiction, given labels for what they struggle with. The early phrase was codependency, which isn't exactly flattering, neither is enabling, but you hear those terms used quite a bit. The benefit of the family disease model, however, is it's one of the few family models that really attempts to explain the cause and the impact of addiction. It really does touch on both of those things. And within that, there's certain roles that people in the family tend to be in. Traditionally, the first one was called, quote, the addict. Now, the reason I put that in quotes, and I won't camp out on this, I'll simply say that the best way to refer to people is as people. Anytime you refer to a person as a label, you are dehumanizing them and treating them as other or less than. So I don't work, for instance, with borderlines. I work with people with borderline personality disorder, and I don't work with addicts. I work with people who have an addiction. I don't work with schizophrenics. I work with people who have schizophrenia. So I always want to acknowledge the humanity of a person first. Traditionally, though, this was referred to as the addict or the IP, which was the identified patient or the identified problem, depending on who you talk to. Then you had on the opposite end of that, usually the other adult in the family was considered the enabler, was the language then. Now it's more frequently called the caretaker or the family manager. And this is the person who, if the person who is addicted stays out all night the day before they're supposed to go into work, and they're high and they come in and they're not going to be able to go to work, this is the person calling up and going, they're not going to make it in today because they've got the flu. They're not going to be able to make it in. Then you have the hero. The hero is the person who is oftentimes trying to redeem the family. They are the person who is, they're in the family because they go, you know what, our family is messed up. Well, we must have done something right because little Johnny or little Susie has done everything perfect. They graduated college. They have 1.5 children, white picket fence, the whole 9 yards. There's something wonderfully redeeming about this one individual in the family who is the hero. The mascot, the way I oftentimes describe them is like, I grew up in the country, and so we had pressure cookers. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. It would sit on the stove, and it had this thing, you clamp down the lid and cook whatever was inside of it. And it had a little thing on top called the regulator that would let out steam. So it would sound kind of like a rattlesnake. It would let the steam out as the heat and pressure built up in that pot. Now, if you take that regulator and tighten it all the way down so no steam gets out, you just created a bomb on your stove. In terms of the family, the mascot kind of serves as that regulator. When things get too tense, when things get too stressful, they will do something cute or something funny to try to break the tension in that family, to try to get everybody to laugh, to try to distract everybody from what the main issue is that's going on right then. And so to try to maybe not keep the peace, but at least keep everything from blowing up. The lost child, in the old days, you always saw them kind of in a corner, and they would be drawing or painting if they were illustrating it. They were in the family, they were part of the family, but they were kind of checked out from the family. Today, they might be, I don't know, in a corner playing Fortnite or whatever, playing some game, etc. So they're there, they're present, but they're not really engaged with the family. And then the scapegoat, oftentimes they have arrows in them because they're the ones who tell the family secrets. If you work in adolescent treatment, you probably work with a lot of scapegoats. I won't go into that deeply other than say more often the adolescent you work with is a symptom of the problem and not the problem itself. So you have the scapegoat, you have all these different roles, and some of them are more socially acceptable than others. But what I want you to understand and to see and connect some dots on here is that all of them are shame driven. All of them are unhealthy. The person in active addiction is trying to go and park under the bridge to stay out of that shame rain, if you will. The family caretaker or manager is just trying to keep the lights on. If the person who is the active person in active addiction is the primary breadwinner for the family, if they lose their job, we're in trouble. So I'm just going to try to keep things up and running as best I can. Maybe there's an element of saving face to that, but more often than not, it's just managing the issues of the family. Excuse me. For the hero, they are the ones who try to earn their worth. In other words, that this tends to lean toward that workaholism, that perfectionism. Oftentimes you see that role as the person who's trying to earn their value. For the mascot sees their role and their value in keeping the family from blowing up. For the lost child, they don't think that they're worthy of being seen, and so they fly under the radar. They stay kind of off to themselves. They're not worth being seen or seen as wonderful. Or if they are seen as wonderful, it's because, oh, look at this great artwork that this person did, this great poetry this person wrote. Often they tend to be creative, though not always. And again, the scapegoat oftentimes shows up with two middle fingers extended. Oftentimes they're the ones who's like the family goes, this child's going to be the death of me, that sort of a thing. The way that ties into family treatment, and also the way that ties into treatment in general, is that these same roles show up in treatment all the time, particularly if you're doing group work. One of the things Irving Yalom talked about was that group therapy is a recapitulation of the family of origin. In other words, it's a chance to challenge and to carry out some of those same dynamics that were present in your family that you came from. Well, what do I mean? All of these roles show up. What I mean? Well, if you're doing a substance use group, the person with addiction is pretty easy to spot, right? But also you get those people who are caretakers, family managers. This is the person when somebody's out and they go, oh, they had a doctor's appointment today. Oh no, they had a job interview today. They weren't going to be able to make it. Well, that's great, but they're supposed to call and let me know that. So sometimes you have to redirect that a little bit. The hero, what does that look like? That's the treatment superstar. That's the one that before you get the question out of your mouth as a group leader, they already got their hand up. Ooh, they got the answer, right? They are on it. They look like they have all their stuff together. And the challenge there is, if they are that eager to please me as a therapist or as a counselor or as peer support in a treatment setting, how eager are they going to be to please their friends when they're at the dope house? That need to earn their value can mess them up in significant ways and lead them to doing some really destructive things. In group, the mascot, when things get too tense, they'll do something cute or funny to get everybody to laugh and cut the tension. The problem is that if you always cut the tension, you never get to the other side of it. There hasn't been that modeled in many cases, that ability to address a conflict and actually resolve the issue. And so if you allow the mascot, which sometimes honestly we're a little thankful for the mascot, we don't like tension either. But the reality is that if the mascot always intervenes, we don't learn how to really navigate the conflict. The way you know that you have a lost child in your group is really simple. You go to write your group notes and you have no idea what to write. They were there, you marked them present. I'm sure they said something, but I have no idea what. They flew under the radar the whole time they were there in the group. And the scapegoat is the person who shows up on day one and they're like, I'm only here because my probation officer said I got to be here. So I'm going to do what I got to do while I'm here. But the second I'm done, I'll do what I want to do. First of all, from an MI standpoint, I don't challenge that. I say, okay, I'm glad you're here. That's my response to that. But they are looking for that rise. They're looking for that critique in many cases. So those dynamics oftentimes play themselves out in the treatment rapport in the treatment episode, whether that's group and individual sessions. You will see that when things get too tense in the session and they cut the tension by making the joke, or they always have their homework right on time and they're super punctual. We love the hero clients, but the reality is they're driven by shame just as much as the scapegoat, just as much by the person in active addiction, etc. So being mindful of that really helps us to consider how those family dynamics play out within treatment. Oftentimes in the old days, when we talked about those roles, what you would see is they would bring in like a mobile that hung over a baby's crib, and they would talk about the fact that you can't move one without it moving all of them. That truly is accurate in terms of family treatment. You can't change one part of the family without it changing the family as a whole. On a macro level, the way I sometimes say that is none of us can change the world, but none of us can change ourselves without changing the world. Within families, that is the same. So if somebody makes a change in that family, it's going to impact everybody within that family to some extent. And that causes some challenges. The reason we want to still do that is all the support and treatment possible might help an individual who was in treatment. But if they go back to a family system that is exactly the same, it's like gravity. It pulls them back into old ways of being, old ways of doing things, old ways of conducting themselves. If you have a significant other or spouse, you've probably seen this, where if you go back to their family of origin at the holidays or what have you, this person who is normally a adult, who is responsible, who acts in a certain way, you get around their family for long, they will start acting in ways and you're like, what are you doing? What they're oftentimes doing is falling back into old roles and patterns from when they were a kid or from when they grew up in that household. Just because a family member may no longer be living at home does not mean they are no longer living with the family. They may have moved out on their own, but oftentimes those messages that they receive are still playing, and the family itself sometimes is still having a significant impact. And what you truly believe matters. Again, we can only reproduce what we are. So if you truly believe that people can and do recover, then people can pick that up. And if you truly believe people are just playing the system to do what they got to do and bide their time until they can get high again, people pick that up. What you truly believe really does matter. And with regard to the family, that's true as well. Not everybody likes working with the families. I spent a lot of years working in the adolescent treatment realm, and I love working with adolescents. I did not always love working with families at all. And that caused some problems because I felt like I was supposed to be engaging the family, but I didn't really like them. I thought, honestly, most of the time when I met the family, I thought, oh, that's why they are the way they are. Whew, that makes so much more sense now. But the reality is, if I'm going to serve the family well, I have to be able to build a rapport with the family, with each member of that family. And that may look a little bit different from person to person. That can make a significant impact. What's another area where what we truly believe matters? Well, if we truly believe that families don't want to be involved in treatment, then we're going to act like families don't want to be involved in treatment. We're going to invite them once. When they don't come, we're going to drop it. What I've found more often than not over the years is that families typically really do want to engage in treatment, but they're really scared it isn't going to work, or they're really overwhelmed and busy and don't have much time. That can be a real barrier for folks. So likewise, if we don't believe that family systems can change, then that means they're probably going to pick up on that as well. Just like in the family, who the family is and who the adults in the family are matters more than what they say or even what they do. Likewise, for us therapeutically, who we are matters more than what we say and what we do. They pick up on what our core beliefs are. So within a family that is less functional, rules that are often intact are: don't feel. I'm hungry. No, you're not. I'm sad. Suck it up. Don't trust. Family business is family business. You don't take it outside the family. You only address it in the family. The problem is that most of the times the families where that's being said also don't allow them a place to speak that either, to express any discontent. And don't speak, period. Don't talk. Don't feel, don't trust, don't talk. That's sort of the three major rules in most dysfunctional families. The problem with that is then they show up to treatment. And what we ask of clients is that they operate in the way a healthy family is. You know what? Trust us and speak and tell us how you feel. And then we wonder why they have difficulty with that. Well, oftentimes their entire upbringing has taught them don't feel, don't trust, don't speak. They show up and we say, trust us and tell us how you feel. That doesn't usually go very well. Now, if they stick with it, if they have an opportunity to find out that it is safe to tell us things, to tell us how they feel, if they do develop trust, which is part of things like trauma-informed care and building a good rapport, the reality is that gives them some experience that challenges the lessons that they learn in their family of origin. That can be incredibly powerful. When you grow up in a family system, you believe whatever the heads or leads of that family tell you until you encounter something different. If you grow up in a household where they tell you, you know what, you can be anything you want to be, you can be the greatest at anything you want to be, you believe that until somebody tells you different. What do I mean? Well, let's say you decide that you're going to be the next greatest singer in the world, and you believe that. But the problem is you are tone deaf. You cannot hear pitch. And so you sing, you end up on that first episode of American Idol where everybody's going, whoo, who told them they could sing? The reality is, yes, we can do many things that we never dreamed we can do, but we can't do anything. Again, 6'0" with a 1-inch vertical. I'm not going NBA, and I'm okay with that. On the opposite end, if you grow up in a household where they tell you you are worthless, you are not anything, you're never going to be anything, you're sorry, you're no count, you're just like your brother, just like your mom, just like your dad, you're a horrible, terrible person, you believe that until it's challenged by somebody who tells you something different. Part of our role oftentimes in working with clients and working with families is to tell them something different, to give them, you know what, you've been devalued by society. You haven't been called a human being or treated like a person. You've been an inmate. You've been called by a number. You've been called an addict, a crackhead, a junkie, a bunch of derogatory terms instead of a human being. But while you are here, I am going to treat you in a way that demonstrates your worth and your value. And I'm going to give you something to contrast against the things that you have been told. And that doesn't mean that it will automatically fix it. It doesn't mean that the client will easily or automatically adopt it or adapt that way of seeing themselves, but it gives them the opportunity to challenge it, to decide whether or not they want to hold on to that, or whether maybe, just maybe, they have more value and worth than what they have been told. So by way of review, like, families really are powerful, that they're not neutral, that families are always changing, that they're dynamic, that they're trying to maintain balance. And a part of that means that they resist change. Families do resist change because all systems resist change. It is the nature of any system to resist change, including in our own skull. Our own systems of thought resist change. If one aspect of that family system changes, it impacts and changes and shifts the dynamics within that system, period. To change the family system by addressing one individual without addressing the whole individual is sort of like the old story of the blind sages and the elephant, where they each have a piece of the puzzle, but they don't, any of them really understand what they're touching. You know, the one who's holding the tail thinks an elephant is like a rope. The one that's got the trunk thinks it's like a snake. The one that's got the leg thinks it's like a tree. And none of them really understand what the elephant actually is, because they each only have a tiny part. In family systems, each person who is a part of that family only has a part of the picture. None of them have the whole understanding. So that engagement of families is incredibly important. A few other assumptions I just want to underscore for a bit is that parents really do love their kids. I've never known any parent who set out to mess their children up or make them miserable. They're doing oftentimes the best they can with what they've got. Now, sometimes what they've got isn't healthy. Oftentimes they inherited dysfunction from their own family of origin. Most of the time, caregivers, family members do what they do because they think it'll help. You know, it may not, but oftentimes they think what they're doing will help. But the best intentions don't always lead to the best results. Like if I see somebody fall down and they're having a heart attack, and I think, wow, I really want to help them, but I don't know anything about CPR, and I start karate chopping them in the chest and think I'm going to help them, my intentions, although good, don't always lead to good outcomes. Likewise, a family member may do what they think will help when it really isn't helping. And that children love their parents. The way I've heard that phrase before, and I don't know who originally said this, or I would attribute it to them, is that when we criticize our children consistently, they don't quit loving us, they quit loving themselves. That is a really powerful statement, that children love their parents innately. Now, as they get to be teens, they don't always express it in the same way. And certainly it can look very different, but they still care about what their parents or caregivers or family believe. So what are some practical steps when we talk about family engagement? Number one is that we actually do want to engage the families to the extent that it is possible. I oftentimes sort of shake my head when I'm working with a program or working with an agency and they go, oh, the families don't want to be involved. In my brain, I always translate that as, we are not yet ready to do the work that is needed to engage families. Now, there are sometimes some good reasons for that. We're all a little bit overwhelmed. Most programs and services are understaffed right now. We all have more tasks to do than we have time to do them. So it can be really challenging. But what I find is if we put in the work to engage families, it really can make a significant difference. It really can sustain those gains longer term. Now, there's a lot of framing of that, ways that that's talked about. But for us, we really got to work and intentionally build rapport with the family, which you can't do without engaging them. You can't build rapport with somebody you've never met. So getting people to the building, or depending on your program, maybe going to the home, depending on what your program or service is, can be a part of that. But building a rapport with that family, that can even start with a first contact by phone or by email or by whatever means you're able to reach, assuming you have a release of information to do so. Parent and family education groups can be helpful in many cases. It may just help them know what to expect in treatment, like what is treatment, what is addiction, or what is the mental disorder in question. Oftentimes letting them know that they are not alone, that listen, every person who comes to this program has a family, and that family is either helping contribute to the addiction or helping contribute to recovery. We want to equip you to be as helpful as you can in supporting recovery. Just framing things in that way can make a lot of difference. Letting them know the resources that are out there, things like Al-Anon, NAMI, Federation of Families, sometimes Favor, Faces and Voices of Recovery. Some branches of that have family groups. Sometimes within Celebrate Recovery, there are family groups. So there's a wide range of supports out there, but the average family doesn't know anything about those. They think they're the only person, the only family who's been struggling with this in the history of the world, it feels that way. They often feel isolated. They feel that stigma. Just like you can, if you're in the room with smoke, somebody who's smoking, you get secondhand smoke. If you're a family member has active addiction, you get secondhand stigma. Honestly, we get that as professionals who work in the substance use disorder field. We sometimes get that secondhand stigma, and they disguise it in niceties and say things like, "Oh, I can never do the work that you do." But the reality is, it's a form of stigma all the same. Are there times when you don't want to engage the family? The answer to that is yes. Uh, Sometimes the family just absolutely is not willing. That like I don't, and in my experience, this is a generality. Take this for what it's worth. I tend to get two kinds of family members. One is the one that shows up and goes, "I don't have a problem. They got a problem. I want you to fix them, and once you fix them, we won't have a problem." They don't have any understanding that they have any influence. It's like, no, this is their issue. They need to fix this. The opposite end of that spectrum is the family member who wants to own the whole problem. Where did I go wrong? Where did I fail my baby? If only I hadn't used, if only I hadn't gotten a divorce, if only I hadn't done X, Y, and Z, then, or if only I hadn't lost them in the supermarket that one time, then that's what caused all of these issues. And the truth of the matter is that it is neither end of that spectrum. You do not have control over whether your family member gets addiction or not. And at the same time, you do have influence over whether your family members get that support or get into recovery or not. Control and influence are not the same thing. So helping them to see their influence can be a part of that. Struggling to come to terms with a separation or divorce. Sometimes if you're working particularly with the child and the parent or guardians are in the midst of splitting up, they're in the midst of a divorce, pulling the kid in while they are trying to work through some of that is not the way to go. You probably need to have a session with those caregivers separately, maybe even individually with each of them, depending on where things are in that process. But you don't want to bring them in there and have them tear each other apart in front of the kid, even though they may well be doing that at the house. You want to be mindful of that in as much as you can. If the family member is a perpetrator of physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, if your client is the perpetrator or a victim of those things, the family engagement piece where that individual is concerned probably does not need to happen. There are people with specialties who may be able to do that work, but the average clinician should not be doing that work. And family that includes other members who are actively using, who may be violent, who may be excessively angry, or say, "Oh, there's no issue. I got high in my day." Sometimes that you can do a little bit of education there and help them understand some of the distinctions. But the reality is that people who are in active use, if they show up tore up to a session, that's probably not going to be particularly helpful for recovery. In those instances, the individual is probably where we need to start. Hopefully we can engage the family at some point if appropriate, again, with those exceptions noted previously, but being mindful of that matters. What about when we should use family? I would say, except in those situations noted above, engaging the family is a good idea. Now, let me press pause here for just a second. One of the things that was in the objectives in the very beginning was understanding the difference between family of chance and family of choice, or family of origin and family of choice. Oftentimes, we may make the assumption that the family will be a support for recovery. Sometimes the family is where they learn to get high. Sometimes I've worked a lot with young people over the years, and I would ask, "How old were you when you first tried this drug or tried to drink?" They'll say, "I was 7." And I'll say, "7?" And they're like, "Yeah, it was my uncle, my older brother. I got high with my dad, or I drunk my mom's bourbon," like whatever. Oftentimes we assume that the family can be a support for recovery, when that is not always true. Some families can be a great support for recovery, and some are a great support for continuing an active addiction. Understanding that distinction makes a lot of difference, because if the family cannot provide the support that the client that you are serving needs for recovery, then we have to tell them, all right, your family of chance, the family that you were born into, they are not able to provide the support to you need for recovery. You're going to have to build a family of support for yourself. That might look like a sponsor. That might look like a couple of friends who don't use. That might look like becoming part of a civic group or joining AA or NA or Celebrate Recovery or Rational Recovery or something like that. It may involve a wide range of things, but you're going to have to build a support system because you do not make it without a support system. We have a word for people who are in recovery by themselves. We call it high. People don't get into recovery by themselves. People need social supports in order to help them maintain their recovery. Willpower is needed. People don't stay in recovery without willpower, but if willpower is all you've got, you are not staying in recovery. You need people around you for when your willpower takes a day off. That is part of that family of choice where you choose to build healthier supports than what your family may be able to provide. Now, we do want to engage families even when there's some challenges there. For instance, when family members might try to protect another family member from the consequences of their behavior or use. When the family members are so focused on one family member that they're neglecting their own personal well-being or other relationships. They're so focused on, maybe this is a parent or guardian who is so focused on the child who is actively using that they completely ignore the one who is not actively using. Or they ignore their own marital relationship or romantic relationship because they're so focused on the acting out behavior of the child. Or sometimes the parent is the one who's using, and an older adult child, their relationships may suffer because they're so focused on the parent or guardian. Siblings who are not struggling diagnostically, in other words, they're not the one with the substance use disorder, may resent those who are. You sometimes see this in other things as well, where somebody has a mental disorder, etc. The other family members, the other siblings, sometimes will resent the attention or the resources that go to that client who needs them. That could be due to the family member's negative impact on the well-being of the rest of the family, or for always being that center of attention, kind of like we alluded to before. So who is the problem? Like, who is the issue? Oftentimes, again, you get that sense of it's all their fault. They are the issue. Fix them. And oftentimes, if it's the parent or guardian saying that, I will challenge that. Like, they'll say, I don't have a problem. They have a problem. And my response is, particularly if I have a good rapport with them, who paid for the gas to get here today? Well, I did. So it sounds like some of the problems they have are impacting more than just themselves. That's part of how I began to transition that, hopefully, to considering engaging the whole family, and hopefully move from who is the problem to whose is the problem. Let's don't focus on this one individual being the problem. How do we collectively come together to address this? Now, today's session isn't on interventions and family intervention and things like that, but there is a methodology called the ARISE intervention program that is very different from what you typically see on like intervention on A&E. The traditional intervention is, you have this person who's using, and somebody jumps out of the bushes and throws them in a van and brings them to somewhere where all the family is ganged up and ready to address all the issues and ways that this person has done them dirty and hurt them and all these things, and then give them some sort of ultimatum about treatment. The ARISE intervention technique takes the person with the addiction out of the center and puts the addiction in the center and says, how do we collectively as a family come together to address the issue of addiction? Not how do we gang up on this one member of the family, but how do we all come together to collectively address the problem being the addiction, not the person. There's a lot more to that, but in the interest of time, I'll just acknowledge that comes out of ARISE intervention technique. What benefits of engaging the family in treatment? Again, we've sort of alluded to these, so I will sort of go through these quickly. Treatment time is brief, but family support is ongoing. That the quality of family member relationships can improve, that family members understand and seek help for co-occurring psychiatric disorders because oftentimes the family members are struggling with their own stuff. It may not be the same stuff, but they may have their own. Supporting post-treatment strategies for greater health, wellness, and recovery. Making sure that they're as healthy as they can be, because who they are is more important than what they say or even what they do. Why don't families come? Sometimes it can be any number of these things. Sometimes family members are scared. Are people going to just put me down? Are they going to think that I'm the reason they're getting high? What is that? You want to make the environment as safe as possible. Sometimes families are misinformed. All they ever know about treatment, what they think treatment is what they've seen on intervention on A&E. So they think that that's what treatment's going to be like, that everybody's going to be, that they have to have this great letter written out and all that sort of stuff. They often have some really confused ideas about what treatment is. That families are often isolated, that they feel like we're the only people who've been through this. We're going to be judged because our child or loved one is going through this, or sometimes our parent or guardian spouse is going through this. That the families get confused because we throw them so much vocabulary and alphabet soup. Like a while ago, I went through that list: AA, NA, Al-Anon, CR. The average family member has no idea what any of that means. So trying to avoid all the technical jargon and speak plainly to someone can be a help. Oftentimes the families have been hurt. And sometimes it presents as anger. That bridge has been burned. What that really means is I really don't want to be hurt again. That can be a part of that. And the families are often overwhelmed. They have other responsibilities. They still have jobs. They may have other kids, or they may have their own marriage. They may have their own relationships they're trying to maintain. They may have things going on outside of the family that are responsibilities. There are lots of reasons that families don't come. So how do we begin to get them to come is some consideration. As a staff, as treatment providers, we have to remember that oftentimes people have been coerced into coming. Even the client isn't always excited about coming, and they're probably not saying warm, fuzzy things about being there to their family. So if we reach out early is better than reaching out late, again, assuming we have a release of information and can do so. We don't violate confidentiality in order to work with families. Coercive pressure to seek treatment is not usually the preferred method for families or for individuals. There's a time and place. There can be benefit to mandated treatment. That's been demonstrated in the literature, but it is not the preferred method of treatment. And be sensitive to some of those motivational barriers that were on the prior slide that we mentioned as well. That it isn't just they don't want to come. It may be that they work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. There could be reasons other than that they just don't want to come. Now, we use a lot of different phrases for types of engagement: family friendly, family focused, family support, family centered, family driven, all these different ways of talking about family care. But I want to spend the balance of our time really focusing on levels of family engagement and begin to bring things in for a landing, being mindful of the time. Know that there are different levels of family engagement. Level 1 is like minimal emphasis. In other words, this usually means I'm working with a juvenile and I need a signed consent for treatment, or I need the spouse's insurance information. Minimal emphasis on the family. We just need a signature. We don't really expect you or want you to be involved. That we just need this to do what we need to do. Level 2, information and advice for the family. What does that mean? That means you might be doing an educational, like a psych ed group on what addiction is. Like I used to do one all the time called "Why Don't They Just Stop?" That was the name of the group. That was the name of the session. Why don't they just stop? And we talked about the reasons physiologically and otherwise for why people don't just quit and immediately change. We had that conversation. So providing some psych ed kind of information can be helpful to the family. Level 3, feelings and support for the family, where you actually know who the family members are. Maybe this is, again, they came to the psych ed group, and maybe there's a support group for the family that meets on site, that kind of a thing, but it's not treatment necessarily. Level 4 is when you get into brief focused intervention. Now that could be specifically with the family members, or it could just be bringing a family member into a session or two. But it's short. It's targeted toward a goal, specific goal. That tends to be the MO of it. It's not all the time. And then that fifth level is true family therapy, where you're engaging the family system in the therapeutic process. That might mean you're working individually with different members of the family. That's at times you're bringing the family members together in session, or sometimes you may even be doing multi-family group where you're addressing multiple family issues at the same time. What I want to encourage you to do is at whatever level you find your program or service at today, try to go to the next level. Don't try to jump to family therapy. If today you're at like, all I want is your consent for treatment, don't try to be doing multifamily group next week, because it will go horribly. You want to build your skill set and your capacity, both as a clinician and programmatically as a program, to be able to address the next step in the chain, not to jump to the end. At one point, I worked with an adolescent residential program, and we decided we were going to have our first family weekend. And so there were things that we did that set up and that worked well that weekend. But what we did that did not work well at all is, and this will sound so basic, you will shake your head. It never dawned on us that they had younger siblings. So we have all this stuff set up where you have adolescents who are struggling. We're bringing them together with the caregivers. At times we're breaking them apart. At times we're pulling them back together. We're doing all this different stuff. But sometimes they're saying grown folk stuff in front of a 6-year-old and being mindful of that. So that was a learning curve. We tried to jump too far, too fast. We learned from our mistakes, adjusted, and then started a sibling group. So there are ways of going about that. But don't try to leap ahead by great distances. Incremental change from 1 to 2, or from 2 to 3, or from 3 to 4 is going to be much more beneficial and manageable for us than trying to leap ahead and do all the things for the family tomorrow. That really won't work out very well for us. How do we get families to engage? Invite them. And when we invite them the first time, don't be shocked if they don't show up. Follow up, repeat, invite them again. Address barriers. Sometimes they don't have the financial means, or they don't have transportation. We did things like we would do gas cards sometimes on specific family day events, those kinds of things, or family session. We would do a gas card so that the person could get to and from if they didn't have financial means. Determine how you're going to engage. In the world of technology, can you do it by Zoom? Particularly if there may be some safety issues there, is that a safer way to do it? Doing that by, well, I say Zoom, but really a platform that's going to be best suited for that, whatever that may be. Welcome the family. Let them know that you actually want them there, that you're glad they came. That's a big thing. Like when they come in the door, smile. Say, I'm so glad you made it today. I wasn't sure if you get to come this time. That can make all the difference. Avoid shaming or belittling the family in any way. Nobody wants to be shamed or put down. Families are no different. Praise incremental change and effort. When somebody makes the effort to show up, acknowledge that. When somebody is only able to stay for part of the day, they can't come to the whole family day, say, I'm so glad you made it for the part that you did. I hope that you're able to stay the whole time next time, but I'm really glad you were here for what you were able to today. Let them know how important they are. Let them know that one of the best indicators for whether or not someone will make it in long-term or sustained recovery is the family support for them in their recovery. Oftentimes, families don't innately get that. And focus on family strengths can be another piece of the puzzle. We want to make sure that we see the good in the family, the good that family system is acting on, that they have going on as well. I put in the chat that evaluation that I mentioned earlier. I switched over real quick just to do that, to be mindful of time. A couple things I will say about that. When you click on that link, it will not kick you out of Zoom. Like if you're on a laptop or desktop, it'll open up a separate tab. So that it takes about 2 to 3 minutes to do that. So I just mentioned that that's in the chat. And if you would please go ahead and click that before the end of the session, before you log out today, that would certainly be deeply appreciated. So focus on those strengths. Don't just focus on the negative things. Focus on the positive as well. See the good in people. Oftentimes, they're used to people seeing the bad. to marginalizing, mistreating, or otherwise looking down on. If you're doing family therapy, the goal of the first session is to ensure there is a second one. The first time I heard somebody say that, I thought that was deeply self-serving. They were like, the goal of the first session is to make sure they come back. But the reality is you can't work with a family member who isn't there. So in that regard, part of your goal is to let them know that they're welcome, let them know that they're important. Don't mistreat them, be respectful, mirror them, see them, and see them as wonderful, and they're more likely to come back. That is really the goal of the first session. You want them to feel heard, that you see and understand their point of view and perspective. Those are all important parts of engaging with the family as well. And basically, emotionally, it comes down, or relationally, it comes down to inertia. Inertia, again, is one of those laws of thermodynamics that things that are in motion tend to stay in motion unless they're acted on by an outside force. Things that are still tend to stay still unless acted on by an outside force. In a very real sense, when we're doing family therapy, when we're engaging the family through education, through support, through referring them to supportive mutual aid groups and things of that nature, we're serving as the outside force that helps to rock the roles, that hopefully moves that family from an active addiction to a more hopefully vibrant and sustainable family recovery. Knowing that it may be awkward, that not everything's going to go perfectly, that we're going to try to make things as safe as possible, but it's not always going to work. That some days, to be perfectly transparent, doing work with families can be more difficult than doing individual work with just an individual person. It's messier. It can be a tremendous pain in the behind. Do it anyway. It can yield wonderful benefits if we will allow it to. This is sort of my Springer final thought for the day. I mentioned Springer earlier. That's 2 in 1 session. I tell you, I got to be careful about that. If anybody told you family was easy, they lied. If anybody told you family therapy was easy, they lied. That the parental or caretaker emotional growth is just as important as the children's emotional growth, and vice versa. That treating professionals are not here to make being in family easy, but we can help family members complete the most difficult job that they will ever attempt: loving each other well for exactly who they are. Now I'm going to move forward to, I put the evaluation link in. My contact information is there as well. But I learned a long time ago, if I start a training a minute late, you will forgive me. But if I go a minute over, those evaluations are going to suffer. So I'm not going to do that to you or to me. I'm going to step back and defer it back over to our wonderful host. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share today, and for Kentucky Systems of Care for affording me that opportunity. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, James. You're getting lots of accolades. We've got one raised hand, but we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A and some in the chat. First, can you talk a little bit more about the AADC technique?
Yeah. Again, I won't focus too deeply on that, but it's its own certification. It is a way of doing interventions that is very different. For instance, the way that they approach the initial invitation for the intervention is by invitation. They literally send out invitations to the family members. And like I think graduation invitations or wedding invitations, they're nice invitations. And even if the person is living under a bridge, they will hand deliver it to try to get that to the person. It isn't a jump out of the bushes. It isn't a surprise. They invite the person. And the first time I heard that, I thought that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Like, that person is not showing up for an intervention. They've seen A&E too, right? They're not showing up for that. But the reality is, even if the person in active addiction doesn't show up, they still hold the intervention, because a RISE intervention approaches it as it is the family system that needs to heal, not just the individual in active addiction. So they move forward with the intervention to help the family system become healthier in the hopes of engaging the person in active addiction as they move forward. It's just a very different approach in that regard. It's called ARISE, ARISE intervention.
Awesome. And then D. Coles, you've got your hand up, and I'm going to let you ask your question out loud. You should be able to ask.
Although I think they're muted right now. They may not have unmuted
Yes.
themselves.
You should be able to unmute and ask.
They may unmute in a moment. But if not, they may have had to, step away or be having some technical difficulties.
Okay.
It happens.
All right, and I'm going to drop that evaluation link in the chat one more time, just in case.
And by way of clarifying, that is really for me at SATTC. This is how we maintain our funding, and so that's why I asked that if you would please do click on that. It's pretty short and sweet. Doesn't take very long to do, but it's how we're funded by SAMHSA, and so they request that we get that evaluation link done. Again, it's just a means of finding out who we're serving, and it holds me accountable. So I don't go, yeah, I did this great training. There were 7,000 people there and they thought it was the best training ever. It keeps me honest in that regard. So that's part of the reason for that. I'd sincerely appreciate it if you do take the time to do that before you log out today. Thank you. I really do appreciate it.
And we've got another question. Wanda has her hand raised. So Wanda, you should be able to come off mute and ask your question.
I really don't have a question. I just wanted to apologize. I have a dog. It just so happened that the electricians are here to do some work at the house at the same time, and they've been in and out. And I didn't think you could hear the dog barking, but he has been really excited.
Oh, well, I'm glad. I was excited to hear James too.
And when I disappeared, it was to try to gain control. I'm sorry.
No worries at all.
Oh, that's okay. And
I really enjoyed it. I want to get on to my evaluation now.
Thank you, Wanda.
Thank you.
We'll also have the recording up on the System of Care website. So anything that was missed will be available soon. And if there are no other questions, we'll let you go. Oh, and then James, there is a question about slides. Will those slides be available?
If it's easiest, what I could do is send those to you. And if anyone wants those or request them, or if you want to send them to the list, either way is fine.
Okay. That sounds great.
Thanks so much, James, for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. I appreciate what you do so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Take care. Always a pleasure to hear from you.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.